All right. So, running through this, we are talking about how to build a business model, but I want to take a step back and talk about how each one of the steps in the business model actually work into getting funding. So, as a credit analyst, I was trained, and every credit analyst, banker are trained on these same things. This isn't my teaching, this is something that is taught in every credit course ever made. But it's the five C's of credit. And so we look at your character, capacity, capital, collateral, and conditions. Your character on a consumer loan, most people are more familiar with like your credit score and things like that to talk about the character. Basically, the bank wants to know, are you the type of person that's going to continue to pay back the bank, or are you just going to let it default? On a commercial loan, though, your credit actually matters significantly less, which is kind of funny because they're usually bigger transactions, unless you're Melissa Green and you're getting funding based on your credit score. But with there is a business credit score called the DMB. As a credit analyst, we would look at it to make sure that there was no fraud or anything, but other than that, we didn't really care. And your personal credit score does factor into it because we're probably going to take a personal guarantee on the loan. But if you have bad credit, all we have to do is write a memo and talk about why you have bad credit, and usually we can get it overturned. What's more important, though, is building up the character of the business to make sure that the banker understands who you are, what you do, and that it makes sense. So that's actually where branding comes in very significantly in getting your funding. Capacity is, do you have the capacity to pay it back? And what they're looking at is they're going to pull up your P&L statement or your projections, and they're going to compare it to your marketing scheme and make sure everything looks kosher, that a banker can understand how you're going to make money. One thing I want to remind everybody is that a banker only has macro level knowledge of all the industry. So even though something makes a lot of sense to you, it may not make sense to the banker or the credit analyst that's underwriting the deal because they don't know all the ins and outs. So you have to be very diligent in explaining your projections. Next is capital. This is making sure that you have the sources for your down payment and things like that. On a consumer loan, the down payment goes directly to the loan, right? So if you get a mortgage on your house, you put down your 20% and that pays off, or that pays down your debt. Commercial is very different where you can utilize the down payment to actually benefit the loan. So, for example, in commercial real estate, we have to do a lot of renovations to buildings before we get it going. The money that we put into the building can actually be used as the down payment in those terms. If it improves the building or if it improves the business that's getting funded or something like that, because that can increase the loan to value. We just lost Clayton. It improves the loan to value and it improves the deal. Collateral is the amount of assets that you have. Just like on a mortgage note, they're going to take your house as collateral. Commercial loans do have that, but it comes down to understanding the story and understanding what you have. Branding can actually be used as an asset. There are rules and regulations about how much you can contribute a value to your brand, but branding is an asset on your balance sheet, and then you have other more tangible assets as well. But the bank has to understand the value of those. And then last is conditions. And so last week we talked about the competitive analysis and SWOT analysis. This is where the bank's going to go to understand who are the other major players in the market, what else is going on in the industry. Bankers are terrible at not really understanding the whole picture of stuff. I was trying to get a loan one time for what is it called? Multi office studio incubator. And at the time, WeWork had just gone out of business. And so all of the bankers that I talked to said, "Oh, we're not going to fund that model because WeWork just failed." But they didn't actually look into why WeWork failed. If WeWork failed because of a management problem, not that the plan was bad. And so this is your chance to explain and overcome any objections that they might see. So that's how all of this builds into what we're talking about. And this is why I've broken down the steps of the business plan the way I have and why it becomes significant later on. Does all that make sense? Do I need to clarify anything, Mindy?
I don't think so. I think it speaks spot on. I mean, one thing I think maybe collateral with the brand, like when we think of Kleenex, like the parent company of Kleenex and the corporate name is Kimberly Clark, right?
Mm-hmm.
But every facial tissue that we come across, it's Kleenex. Well,
Right.
that brand has significant value.
Yep.
And so that
Band-Aids
would
the same way.
be
Yep.
considered the collateral for a brand.
Yeah, I looked it up. Nike values their brand around 40 to 75 billion dollars, depending on
Yeah.
uh,
Believe it.
what study you're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And we talked last week about Ferrari and how much they believe in protecting their brand, that they will go buy back cars from people that they don't see fit to own them.
Right.
We'll wait for
Sorry
Wade
about
to
that. I just got
hop on
bounced.
again, I guess. There he is. Oh, no problem. We just went through the 5 C's of credit. So but what we're here to talk about today is how you develop a brand and why it's important. We're going to use Genghis Khan as an example. Genghis Khan was maybe one of the most controversial figures in history. And we'll go through kind of how he built his empire and what some of the controversies are. So first, we will start off with defining branding and talking about what it is. So you have a little bit of an idea what we're talking about when we jump into the story of Genghis Khan. We'll talk about how Genghis Khan used his brand to grow his empire to the biggest empire the world has ever seen. Then we will talk about the strategic code, which is a breakdown of what he did and how he built his brand, if you will. And then we will talk about how to build a brand on your own and make it operational, and then where to get started. So before I jump to that screen, Mindy, you sent a really interesting text, and I don't want to show you the next screen because I have my definition of branding. But can you kind of give an overview of that definition of branding that you sent?
So we think a lot of times, I mean, for a personal brand versus the brand reputation, and they're two different things. And so a personal brand is the result of your personal branding process. It's something that's within your control, right? It's your identity, it's your expressions. I mean, it's even the glasses you wear. If you do a lot of Zooms, it's the Zoom background behind you. It's your glasses, clothes, it's all of that. So, but on the other hand, reputation is how people perceive and react to your personal brand. And so it's influenced by other people's opinion of you. And you don't have control of that at all. And so it's not just their opinions of you, but it's their reactions to your actions. So, if you're representing your company or your brand, and I mean, maybe this is a great example. A girlfriend of mine, her daughter, she's a teacher, and she got home from work, put on her pajamas, and then went to Walmart. And a lot of people do that. But both of her parents were like, "What are you doing? Don't do that." Like, that's when people see you outside of your classroom, what do you want them to see? And so you can't have, kind of like a split personality. It's hard to do that if you're self-employed. You can't
Yes.
have what you are to the face for the face of your company and then have a completely separate and different life outside of that. And
Right.
so I think it goes to speak when you're thinking of brand. It's not just if you're a solopreneur, it's not just the brand of your company, but it also ties very closely to who you are as a person, what values you hold.
And yeah, I mean, how many people do you run into that, talk about honesty and integrity with their brand,
Yes.
but then there's just something about him, you can't believe a word they say,
Hmm.
so.
Yeah.
I mean, a
Yeah.
lot of it is just being very genuine and
Authentic.
authentic with your brand. If
Hmm.
you're somebody who likes to go out and party and have, but you have this very holistic Christian brand, you've got to understand that those
Yeah.
two things can conflict in a lot of people's mindsets.
Way far apart. Way
Exactly.
far apart.
So you
Yeah.
have to be mindful of how you establish your brand to make sure that it's authentic to who you are.
Exactly.
All right. I like that because personal branding is something that I don't, I know what it is. I don't have a lot of knowledge on how to develop it. So I am just talking about branding from saying from a business perspective isn't right because we just said that your personal brand does tie into your business brand, but they do go hand in hand as you just talked about. But I am not a personal brand expert. I'm not really a branding expert either. I figured out how to. I figured out the steps to create a brand that works for not only your business model but for the bank in a way to explain to the bank what you stand for and how you stand for it. I don't dive into a lot of the creative aspects because that's not my field. So the best thing I can tell you is to set up your brand the way that I'm telling you to, and then take it to, if you're not the creative person, take that to somebody who is the creative person to develop the visuals, the logos, and things like that. I will also say I've worked with several really good branding experts and or even marketing experts, and they always start with understanding your story and understanding your brand before they start producing marketing material or logos or anything. At least the good ones do. I've ran into a handful that'll just say, what do you want as a logo, and then they'll create it. That's not really branding. That's creating a logo. So I love your definition. I'm definitely not saying it's wrong. I think branding is a wide sprung or a wide reaching term that can cover a lot of different things. So the definition of brand that I like is it's a promise to your people, and your people is ambiguous intentionally because really it's a promise to your stakeholders, which is anybody who can be involved in your brand, whether that's your investors or your employees or your customers. But you're establishing a set of principles that you live your life by, just like you were talking about making sure your personal brand is authentic to your business brand. Your business brand has to be authentic to your customer base. The best example I think I can come up with is if you say honesty, integrity in your mission and value statement, but your Enron, which did have honesty and integrity in their vision and mission statement, and you're intentionally lying and defrauding the SEC, then your brand is not matching up with your operations. But the promise that you're making can be made up of, as you said, your reputation, which your reputation you may or may not have control over. It's your identity and the actions that you take. So, why does it matter? Because a strong brand is proven to increase revenue by it allows people to recognize you in the marketplace. It helps you with loyalty. There are a lot of people that are very brand loyal, as you talked about. Kleenex has such a cult following that we no longer refer to them as facial tissues. It's just everything is a Kleenex.
Hmm.
Harley Davidson has such a strong brand that people get it tattooed on themselves. So it also helps with like word of mouth marketing, that people understand how to explain your business to other people so they can send people your way. But it can also establish what I like to call, you guys take your kids bowling, right? And they put up the gutters, the inflatable gutters, so your kid has to bowl the ball down the lane correctly.
Right.
This sets up those guiding gutters for you. So when you come down to a decision you don't know how to make, you can use it like, you guys remember the WWJD bracelets? What would Jesus do?
Right.
Your brand should be like that. So as you're sitting there trying to make a tough decision, it's okay, what do we actually stand for? Does this decision align with our mission and values?
Well, I think that too speaks, and we'll probably touch on this later on in the series, but it speaks to even what channels you go into and where you kind of focus, whether you're selling a product or a service, it kind of focuses where you're going to do that as well.
Yep. So especially for somebody just starting out, I have this conversation all the time. Strategy and branding are the two hardest chapters that I have selling to people, because they think, oh, we don't need a strategy, we don't need a brand, which actually is your brand in a sense. But
Well, sometimes I've seen where people will start calling you something. I mean, you'll go out there, you do your face fronting, whether you go to meetings or you do social posts, then someone starts labeling you as something that they identify with. Sometimes that labeling they give you, like hypothetically, say myself in the video ad business, if people started calling me the ad man, basically that would be a brand that wasn't created by me, but it was actually a brand of how people interpret me. So I think sometimes it's always interesting that sometimes, I think in our engagements with other people, sometimes they'll identify you and recognize you by what you do, but that somehow could actually create your brand because that identification has already been labeled for you, if that makes any sense.
that makes a lot of sense. In fact, I used to work with a guy who was a branding expert, and he said your brand is the sum total of what people say about you after they walk away.
Mm-hmm. That's good.
And there's a lot of ways that you can impact that and influence it. A lot of it's the stories you tell, the mission statement, the value statement, the look, which includes the logos and colors. That's the sexy part that everybody wants to talk about, but there's a lot of work that has to go into building that. The language that you use, both internal and external. So external is the marketing piece that we'll talk about in the next chapter, but that's the sexy thing because it drives revenue with a impact, with an immediate impact. Where internal communication though is much more ambiguous on how it shows an ROI. But internal communication, by the way, is the emails that you send to your employees. It's the policies and procedures that you put in place, and things like that that are all internal. But you have to understand that the internal marketing ends up being said and produced by your customer-facing employees or
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So they actually do have a huge, significant impact. All right, so moving on. Genghis Khan. The reason I love talking about Genghis Khan and his brand is because we actually know more about Genghis Khan's brand today than we do Genghis Khan himself. Actually, there was no written history of Genghis Khan. There was no written language at the time that he lived. So everything we know about Genghis Khan is all his brand. And, he was a very controversial character. Some looked at him as a tyrant. Some looked at him as a humanitarian. Some looked at him as one of the greatest military minds in the world. And it really depends on your perspective of him. There's a book that I love about Genghis Khan called Genghis Khan, Making of the Modern World. And it really does it breaks down a lot of the history, not just the lore. And I was reading this book. I happened to run into my former neighbor who was a very devout Muslim. And in the Muslim culture, he's looked upon as an absolute tyrant, like the second coming of Satan. The second I mentioned his name, he's like, oh, he is like the worst person ever. But he actually did fight for religious freedom, and he did fight for Muslims, although most of his battles were against the Muslim religion. But he did stand up for Jewish and Christianity as well as he was not even religious; he was spiritual. So he did stand up for stuff like that. So a lot of people did look at him as a humanitarian. But the picture on there is a enormous statue that still exists in Mongolia today, and they think of him as a hero. I mean, he changed the history of Mongolian history, or he changed the impact of Mongolian history. But his story didn't start off where you would think it would, where he just was born into power. In fact, he vehemently stood against that type of hierarchy. He was born as an orphan and completely abandoned. His dad passed at a pretty young age, and him and his family were forced to survive on the Mongolian landscape, which is a very harsh landscape to survive on, basically on their own. And he had a pact, which sounds a lot like I'm trying to think of a good way to describe this. But he ends up developing like a blood pact, which has this whole weird ritual thing. We would probably look at it like a gay wedding today, but there was no sexual stuff between them, supposedly. I don't know. But with another friend, and basically they rise to a point where the two of these guys are two of the most significant clan leaders in Mongolia. You have to understand that Mongolia wasn't, at the time, wasn't a country that worked together. It was made up of a whole bunch of different clans that all had their own ideas about how things should be ran. So he starts rising to power, and this blood brother of his decides to wed one of his daughters to Genghis Khan to create an alliance, basically. And at the wedding, Genghis Khan is ambushed. They kill basically all of his entire army, and he is left with like 9 followers. I think some accounts say 20 followers, some say 9. So it's all kind of lore at that point. But he starts developing. After that, he develops his own code. He develops his own laws, and really starts attracting a lot more followers as being this tough, smart, brilliant leader. And he grows this 9 to 20 army into a huge army. And he does this through alliances. And he does it with a very strong iron fist, to the point where he ends up taking all of Mongolia over. What's interesting is by 2006, he has united all of the tribes of Mongolia, and he says he's done. He doesn't want to expand after that. But he does continue to sell the idea to Mongolians and his followers that he wants to create this prosperous environment for not only him. Actually, he doesn't even really care about riches, but he wants to create it for the empire, and he understands that trade routes with China is one of the best ways to do it. So he sends a couple riders to, this is completely tangential, but it's fascinating. He sends some riders over to China to create trade routes with one of their, I forget what they actually call their leaders, but the Chinese representative, king, czar, whatever it is, decapitates his riders and sends them back, which is like the ultimate insult in their world, right? Which starts this whole...
The ultimate is like, we don't want to deal with you.
Yeah, not only do we not want to deal with, we don't respect you enough to let your messenger go. They literally killed the messenger, right? and send them back, which starts Genghis Khan's entire tirade against the Chinese regime, to the point where the Great Chinese Wall was literally built just to keep Genghis Khan out. That's how much they feared this guy, and a lot of it was based on his brand. So I can't remember if we talk about this on this slide or the next slide. Oh yeah. And one of the things that he did, so he creates an empire based on a set of rules and regulations that's different than everybody else that's going on at the time. So he differentiates himself from the rest of the environment, if you want to talk about it in business terms. Then he not only creates his rules and regulations that his followers have to live by, but he is so iron fist about it that he actually puts his mom on trial for violating the laws, and threatens to kill her. Actually, he doesn't actually kill her, but he didn't just talk about these things, he actually lived up to it. And then he also produced some of the first versions of external marketing, because he was playing psychological warfare, where he would send messages to the opposing army about how awful his army is, to the point where there were a whole bunch of battles he didn't have to fight. He just had to tell people that he was coming, and they would surrender automatically. So he had one of the strongest brands ever in the history of the world. So, but the thing that made him so impressive is his ability to unite the clans. And so if you break it down, the mistakes that the other clans made versus his was that they favored the elites. So you were born into royalty, basically. And it didn't matter if you were good or not, you were gifted the silver spoon, I guess. But everything that he did, you had to earn. So you weren't promoted based on your lineage. You were promoted based on your merit. So were you loyal to the clan? Did you have something good to contribute? That'd be nice in today's world, wouldn't it? The nobles of other clans, they didn't follow the rules. You know, they were the worst about the rules for thee, but not for me. And he enforced them with an iron fist. Like I said, he put his mother on trial for violating the rules at one point. He also shared his wealth. So he accumulated one of the biggest masses of wealth in the history of the world, and he didn't want anything to do it. Now his heirs did, his kids kind of spoiled the fun, and they did want the wealth, and they did start promoting people based on their lineage but rather than their merit. But that's besides the point. So all of the wealth that he gathered, he ended up gifting out into the Mongolian economy. The clans at this point, they were pretty bad about making promises and not keeping them. So there was a lot of betrayal, a lot of things like that, where they said, you know, just like the wedding that he went to, you know, they would do stuff like that and then betray their allies, where he never did. If he said that he was going to go to battle for you, then he actually did it. And then all of the other tribes were very focused on just what they did within their little tribes. They didn't want to reach out and reach across the aisle and try to unite each other. It was very much like, I guess, modern day politics, if you want to go that route of, you know, you don't associate with the other clans, you just associate with our clan. So to put this into perspective, I want to use a smaller analogy, one that we can think of today. And I played baseball growing up, right? So if you look at specifically Little League, there are different teams set up for different purposes. You have your win at all costs traveling teams that, you know, that's all they do is win. Mm-hmm. It's good for some people. There are players that thrive in that type of environment. But you also have other players that don't work well in that environment. The team that I played on in college baseball, we were very traditional. We had very traditional values. You know, we didn't allow beards. I had to shave. It was awful. We we worked out by today's standards what would be illegal. We had practice every single day, 5 o'clock in the morning and at night. Um, and it was no nonsense. As long as you played by the rules, you were good. There are other teams that thrive on having a very relaxed type of environment. It's a lot more fun. Some of our summer ball teams were like that because we were only together for 3 months, where people could kind of relax and just play. And so my point is, these clans were set up for different purposes, and the reason that Genghis Khan was so successful in uniting them is because he allowed for different tolerances, but he ruled his clan with an iron fist, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So if we take what Genghis Khan did and boil it down to the basics, we get kind of a structure of how he created this. First, he set the vision. The trade routes with China and the gosh, I can't say that word today.
Prosperity.
The prosperity of the Mongolian Empire was his vision. And one of the interesting things about the time that he lived in, there was no written language. So he did all of this by telling stories and creating the vision and selling it to his followers. Then he created the law. It was called the Yasa. And it had very strict laws and very strict repercussions for not following the law. And nobody was above the law. It didn't matter what your lineage was. If you broke the law, you were tried and you were persecuted for it.
Okay, so quick question. Would you correlate that to your brand kit?
Yes, absolutely. I'll get to that in the next slide where I break down how this relates. But foreshadowing, yes, I think the rules and laws that you cannot violate are similar to the mission and values that you create for your business. Then he knew that there was no written language, so he couldn't write this stuff down and put it on a wall and say this is the law or whatever. So he created stories and songs. If you think about the way that history was passed down through generations, going predating the Bible, but even the Bible was passed down this way, it's all about songs and stories. That is the way the human mind works. In fact, there's a great saying that facts tell, but stories sell. So it's all about developing something that somebody else can keep in their mind and be able to talk about at an educated level, even if they don't have it written down in front of them. And then I already talked about how he created his own marketing material, but he built a brand that was so feared by other enemies. There were several battles that he avoided just because of the brand that he created, and he maintained loyalty from his followers. I already missed that point. But back to one of the other differentiating factors that I think is fascinating. We talked about the samurai last week. And one of the things that the samurai is always known for is that if you are disgraced in battle or disgrace yourself or something, you kill yourself. That was kind of the thing. Also, dying in battle was honorable. Genghis
So that's where it
Khan.
came from. The phrase "falling on your sword." Is that where that came from?
Yep, exactly. Genghis Khan was actually very much against that. There were songs that he developed to basically market against that, to the point where if you were a soldier in his army and you talked about an honorable death in battle, you were taken aside and you were given your honorable death a little early. So that's how much he believed in his laws and how strongly he enforced them. So if we take the cheat code that is given to us by the example of Genghis Khan and apply it to your business, this is what it looks like. Tell your story. Set the vision, define the rules, and implement the strategy. And to use more business language, I guess, it's your brand story, your mission and values, and implementing processes and procedures. So the way that I create these, and this is the cheat codes that I've figured out along the way. And again, just like last week, I have 3 different levels of complication for this. So if you're just starting out, you have no idea how to develop a brand or how to start presenting yourself. The very first thing we talk about is your 0 milestone. And this is a branded phrase for my company. And this is a perfect example of how strong a brand can be for you. When I went out and I told people that I developed a company called Thousand Paces, people would always ask, "What does Thousand Paces mean?" It was in the ancient Roman history. They decided that they were going to start building roads. They were one of the first to develop road systems, and they started off right in the middle of the city. They put what was called the Golden Mile, and then they would walk out 1,000 paces, and they would lay the next stone, which ended up becoming known as a milestone. And then they would go the next 1,000 paces, and that's how they eventually developed the roadway system. So when I first started networking, I would tell people 1,000 paces, and I was the founder, and they would probably remember. But then I would tell them the story of why 1,000 paces is named what it is, and people would come back to me all the time and say, "Oh, you're the guy that taught me about history in like 2 minutes." And that's what stuck in their mind. It was the story rather than just the name and logo. And there's several brands. I'm sure you guys could name several that have something similar. Four Roses Whiskey was introduced to me not too long ago. And there's a whole story. I don't remember the exact story, but it was something about the founder gave his wife 4 roses. And that's why he named it Four Roses. So
Okay.
I don't remember the story, but I remember the idea, and it was fascinating. And now I like Four Roses whiskey. So that was another example I had.
But sometimes there's stories that after you see the brand and you see this story, and sometimes the story doesn't relate to how they're portraying themselves. So it kind of gives you that kind of like that. And I think a lot of it's happening in media today, Rob and Mindy, is that everyone tries to infuse comedy or satire or cats or whatever it may be into their scripts because they see the majority of the people happen to like that as entertainment. But there are many times that you'll see something that has a brand name, but it doesn't relate to and actually tell their story. And it kind of gives you that moment like, what are they talking about? And maybe that's a strategy in their own as well, because at least you got eyeballs on the asset, whatever you were portraying. But sometimes I've had that experience where the story doesn't align itself to the brand.
Well, and I think you can reverse that as well. Of the brand doesn't actually mean shit without the story. So
Yeah.
Nike, for example, the Nike swoosh. Do you guys know the history of the Nike swoosh?
Yeah, Michael Jordan.
Well, he's the one that made it. Yeah, he's one of the reasons that it was so famous. But they paid $50 to an art student, I think at the University of Oregon, just to create a logo. It didn't mean a damn thing. It meant $50 then.
Yeah.
Now it's worth, what I just say, 45 to 70 billion dollars, depending on what type of valuation you use.
Yeah.
So the logo didn't mean a damn thing however many years ago. Now it's worth $70 billion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Apple's logo has a very similar story as well. Like,
Yeah,
Yeah.
I know I know how much Apple's brand is worth, but I don't know the story behind the logo.
yeah, I'll look that up and share it in the meeting.
But I have so many people that come to me and they're so hell bent on getting the perfect logo. I'm like, it doesn't matter. If you have a good story behind the logo and behind the brand, then the logo will eventually catch up to the story.
And I think you've seen that somewhat in social too, Rob, where a lot of real gurus on LinkedIn will tell you, don't tell people what you do, but tell them in terms of features and benefits and so forth. But rather than saying I'm a video marketing whatever, is really get into as much as room you have to the story of what you do. Even in your title next to your name, it should be more portrayed in a story of how you service or help people, as opposed to just saying I do X, Y, or Z.
Yep.
Yeah.
Oh, do you have something?
Well, I think too, sometimes like your brand, it never sleeps,
Yes.
Right.
like ever. And so every interaction is a brand experience, and there's a brand, I mean, there's a reaction, there's some thought and feeling to every interaction that you have with the brand experience. So,
Absolutely. And that's why setting the rules becomes very important, because once you put something out there, you lose control of it, right? So if
Right.
you're putting marketing material out there, how people interact with that material, you don't necessarily have control of. If you send your salespeople out, you don't have control over what they're doing. But if you set the rules and regulations, which I will eventually call the mission and values, it gives them a set of principles to help maintain your brand.
yeah, I think it gives guardrails, right, for you to be able to kind of control that narrative to a certain degree. You don't get
Right.
to control the whole, all the parts and pieces of it, but you do get to control, with the brand kit, you do get to control what the colors are, what the fonts are, all of those nitty gritty details. You get that control, but
Right.
much more than that.
And I talked to a bunch of entrepreneurs. One of the first thing a lot of entrepreneurs want to do is get swag, right?
Yeah.
And it's cool. I'm glad that people are so dedicated to their business that they want the swag and they're excited about it. But the problem you run into is, oh, I want pink and purple, and that would be for the women, and the whatever colors over here. And it's like, stick to your brand colors, because it helps. The best way to create a brand is just to say the same thing over and over and over the exact same way, because that's how it sticks in people's minds.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're constantly changing colors to make it cute, you're going to end up confusing people. And that's why we create the story. So the reason I start with the story is because this sets up everything else. So it's very hard just to say, okay, I'm going to write a mission statement, or I'm going to write a value statement. And you're probably going to go to ChatGPT and say, help me create a value statement. And it's going to spit out some generic thing. So I start with the story because A, it captures your actual tone. B, there are things that you talk about and things that you say that may not come out unless you're prompted for it. And so the best way I have figured out to do this, because I used to have all my clients write it down, and that was always impossible. And then you'd get this clean, cushy thing that, doesn't stand out in a crowd. It just falls in with the regular corporate-y mission statements and stuff. But I have started recording people, and I'll ask the exact same questions that I do now, or that I did then when I had people write it. But by interviewing them, you get a lot more personality out of it. And so the best thing I can tell you to do is take these examples and go either record yourself or have somebody interview you and talk about these things, and then take the transcript from that video and turn it into what we're going to talk about later. So the first thing that I always ask is, how did you get started? What sets you apart from everybody else? And what was the turning point that made you decide to do this? And so that establishes your history, your credentials, and why, or your why, basically. Simon Sinek's Start With Why. So many people, I actually had a friend that didn't believe me, and what's funny is he's a documentarian, and he didn't buy into this at first. But I said, people want to understand your why. So if you create a video about why you started your company and where you came from, that will do more for you than any marketing material that you can put out there. And so we gauged it. He put it out. He did it. He created the video, put it out on his media, and that was the most shared video that he's ever produced. Well, I mean, beside he is a filmmaker. So besides his actual films, that was
Yeah.
the most
Well,
shared marketing material, I guess.
well, I think we're
So
so bombarded now that, and and I think as a culture, we've been through so many people portraying themselves as X and really ended up being Y. They're really not what they portray themselves. So I think the
mhm.
two things that I really learned over the years is being very transparent. People want to do business with people that they like, know, and trust. And like you said, Rob, what a better way to have someone ask questions through a podcast, through a video, or even doing it yourself. But also, it has to be relatable. And I think because people can relate to someone that's trans.
Yep. Well, and I think so many people are afraid to be vulnerable that I remember there was one guy that I won't do business with. I won't name any names, but the first time I met him, he told me he portrays himself to be this great entrepreneur. And the first time I met him, he told me that he has never failed in business. And I called bullshit.
Yes.
Immediately, I was like, I have never talked to an entrepreneur that doesn't have a failure. And if you don't have a failure, it's going to happen at some point and you're not going to know how to handle it.
Mm-hmm.
So don't be afraid to be pretty vulnerable in, in these types of stories. People learn from failures. That's what people want to hear, is that it wasn't always squeaky clean. Think of Genghis Khan's story. He didn't start off as he didn't inherit the Mongolian Empire. He started off with nothing and built into it. And that is way more memorable than, oh yeah, I just, I was successful overnight.
Yeah, no.
All right, so the zero milestone is the beginning. Think of cinematography, the origin story, if you will. So that is the place that I always start. The second challenge I have is the $1 million challenge. And you can call it whatever you want because $1 million isn't a lot of money in these days. And I get so bogged down with people like, well, I'd have to really budget for $1 million. Call it 10 million, call it a billion, whatever it is. If I gave you $1 million, $10 million, $1 billion, whatever it is, how would you spend that money? What would you spend it on? And what would your business look like? And what this does is it helps you understand your goals. Where do you want to go? And people really want to know that you're somebody who's going to be around for a while. I'm sure I work with a bunch of startups and stuff like that. And I know this is kind of a norm for the startup world right now, but people are like, oh, well, I'm going to start it and then in 5 years I'm going to exit and that's my goal. It's like, okay, then you don't have the grit that it takes to see it through. If your plan is to exit in 5 years, you're not going to stick with it. But if your plan is to, I also hate this one, but I'll use it as an example. But if your plan is to pass it down to your children or something, I know you're going to put in the time and effort that when things gets hard, you're still going to show up and be there.
Yeah.
We will circle back around to this when we start talking about projections, because this will be the end goal that you're building up to. And I'll explain more about that later on, but this will circle back around and it will be included in the financials. And that's something that's usually the point where everybody's like, oh, this isn't just a thought thing. It's something that's actually going to be tangible.
Yeah.
And so I like to take those two stories because it gives you your credentials and it gives you your vision. And then those two things together end up being your mission statement. Remember I said Genghis Khan, if I can go back to that slide, the thing that helped get him to where he was his vision. Because people believed that he could help unite all the tribes and create a prosperous Mongolia. That's why people started following him. you're doing the exact same thing here, is creating the vision. So once you get that down, everything else can kind of fall in suit. I'll also say, if you put a lot of time and effort into developing your strategy and finding your differentiating factor and building your brand, everything else becomes much, much easier. Just like we talked about earlier, you can use this as your guiding principles, your WWJD bracelet, if you will, of, okay, now how do I make decisions going forward? Is it aligned with my brand? Are people in my company acting in a manner that fits my brand? So once you have your brand story, like I said, record yourself, throw it into Chat GPT, and say, okay, what are the most common words I use? What are the most common phrases I use? What types of things do you think I'm really interested in with my business? Once you pull those lists, then you can start to see a very authentic mission. The thing about mission statements, I have seen all my students used to hand stuff in, and I would say, this is shit. I'd be nicer than
Brutally
that.
honest.
Yeah.
So really, A, B, C, D, you gave shit.
Yeah. They would hand me these things and they're like, oh, this is exactly what Google or, some big corporation would say. I'm like, yeah. And it means absolutely nothing. So I know the university I came from had like a full paragraph for their mission statement. Nobody knew what it meant. Nobody could remember it. If you asked anybody at that university what the mission statement was, nobody had a clue. Keep it very short, very simple, and rememberable. So I have a whole lot of things that I can say bad about Stretch Lab, but I loved the way that they created their mission and values, because their value statement was live long. Separately, didn't mean anything, but once you combine it with the value statements, you can start to understand what live long meant. And it was short and memorable, and it was literally on our wall. And so as we were operating during the day, we can look at that as a reminder to make sure we're acting on brand.
Yeah, I think the companies that really do this well, like, it is part of every company meeting. It is part of,
Yes.
It's not just on the walls, but it is like fully, you're immersed in it. Like,
Yes.
you understand what your role is in that mission. So it takes a lot of communication. And, it's not just, hey, we say this like every week in our weekly sales meeting. This is our mission. No, I mean, it's every, like, we eat, sleep, and breathe it. You're fully immersed in the mission and the values for the companies that do this really well.
I heard a story. I can't remember which CEO it was, but he would actually go around and ask people, what is our mission and values? And if they couldn't say it, there's a high chance that they were not going to be around tomorrow.
Yeah,
That's how important.
And also, it's the buy-in of the employees. It's here again, Rob telling that story to get people to buy in. And sometimes there's separate strategies, and we can talk about this when we meet, but separate strategies to get people to buy in, so they become more aware of it, because not everybody buys into a strategy or a mission from the get-go. They're there for different reasons. I think about healthcare. I mean, healthcare, a lot of people choose an occupation because there's plenty of opportunity, upward mobility, but the mission of the organization is to provide quality care. And I know my clinics, to get people back to normalcy, but not everybody came to me because they believed in the mission. They came in there for some of the rewards and benefits they got. So I had to get them to buy in with different strategies so they'd see the value in the mission, everything they did.
Mindy, you do a lot more. I'm using that as a segue, Clayton, not ignoring
Yeah,
it.
no worries.
Mindy, you work a lot more with HR policies and management procedures than I do.
Yeah.
What do you think the number one reason people leave a company is?
Well, there's a lot of reasons. There's bad management. and the values that were stated a lot of times aren't the ones that are actually lived out within the company. For large companies. One organization that I worked for, I mean, he was salt of the earth. It was a privately held company, which I think there's a strong and huge difference between privately versus publicly held companies. A private company, you know, you can lead prayer. You can have a lot more conversations about I guess questionable values from a corporate perspective versus personal. That you know people leave for a number of reasons, but sometimes one of the biggest ones is that your values aren't aligned.
Yep.
You know, your values aren't aligned to this is what we've put out there to the general public and maybe to our salespeople and everybody in the organization, even our vendors and our suppliers. But it's not actually what we're living day to day. Like
Yep.
we're not operating in integrity. We're not operating in honesty, even though that's one of our values. It's like no, everybody's cutting everybody down within a meeting, and it's just it becomes toxic in a way.
Well, also
Like
the word valued, I think, the employees themselves don't feel valued because the way the owner or the employer treats them as a commodity, as a replaceable commodity, as opposed to an integral part of the organization. So I know that, some of the surveys I've been doing in the last few years is a lot of people, isn't the wages, the benefits, it's the atmosphere in their workplace, like you said, Mindy. Not, they'll say one thing, but and it's not all across the board. Employees are treated differently at different levels, even at major corporations. I'm aware of. So people feel devalued. In many cases, even feel devalued as even human. In some cases, because the way they're treated to the extremes, but mostly based on their competencies. People don't value how important they are to the overall success of the company.
well, and a lot of times when people know a brand, um, I'm trying to think of brands that I could say that I haven't worked for. When you know a brand and it's over the top and it's always exciting and maybe it's loud, just that brand identity is really loud and exciting and very active. And then you go into that corporate culture, like you are so excited you want to work for this brand and you
Mm-hmm.
go interview and you're like, this is so not what I thought it was going to be, right? I mean, I think we've all had those experiences where it's just like, this is what this is? Okay. I mean, there's a huge brand discrepancy,
Right.
right? A disparity there that really needs to be addressed if you want people bought in.
Well, and if you're still not sold, and I'll take the analytical route here. There are a large number of people who will only invest in companies if they also align with their values. So there are mutual funds and all sorts of stock portfolios that specify they will only invest in certain brands based on their values.
Mm-hmm.
It can be a portfolio that only invests in women-owned companies or minority-owned companies or whatever. We've seen companies get canceled because they don't align with somebody else's values. And then,
But
if you want to take I fear at this point people are understanding who our audience is in NIA. I fear a lot of people don't have employees. So, how would you say a mission statement helps a solopreneur?
well, whether a solopreneur or working for a brand, because uh, even though we're talking about a business that has employees, and if you're a solo entrepreneur, like a lot of us are, and we have 1099 people that work for us, they're all subcontractors, is that we really are the brand. I mean, we really are the brand. And so, I think of some of the people that work for some of the financial organizations in our group. And even though there's many of those folks, Mike has to stand out amongst those, and everything that's being applied to a corporation you are the corporation. I mean, and I'm reading a great book right now. The change comes from within, and that happens at the top of any organization, any CEO, any owner of a company. Well, if you're working for an organization, you want to be the best sales person, or you want to meet the expectation to meet your lifestyle, you have to become that entity yourself, I think. So I think that's why when you talk about businesses, Rob, I'm so focused on some of these individuals because I'm actually, it's funny we talk about this because from the conversations I've had with you and Mindy in the last couple of months, I'm actually rebranding myself, what I do. And I'm very cognitive of what you're saying, but yeah, we are the brands, whether we like it or not. And whether you work for somebody or you own the company, I believe anyways.
Right.
I think too, as a solopreneur, like your mission statement is the direction with which you're going, right? Like it is that, I don't want to say it's that guiding principle, but or light or whatever word you want to use for that. But it is the guide for the purpose of your business.
Yep, exactly. I just realized we didn't actually explain values. We talked a lot about them, but we didn't actually explain what they were. So the mission statement is the vision, right? It's what you stand for. The values are a list of ways that you're actually going to accomplish your mission. So once again, I read a lot of one of my jobs used to be going through 10Ks of big publicly traded clients, and the first part of a 10K with their annual report is all about the company, where it's going, where it's been. And so I read a whole bunch of mission statements and value statements, and you come across, like I said, the paragraph mission statements that mean absolutely nothing, that nobody's ever going to remember. And then you look at their values and you see like 15 of them. Nobody is going to remember all 15. It's not feasible. So I like to keep the value statements between 3 and 5 very specific values. The way I like to structure it is you have a word that represents the value, and then out beside it, you explain what that means to your company. So, for example,
basically,
do what?
like a clarifying statement. You have the
Exactly.
word, and then how does that apply? Because a lot of these words can mean like abundance or creativity. I mean, it means something different to each one of us. And so what does
Exactly.
that mean for your brand and
Yeah,
your business?
let's use abundance because you just used it, and I like that word. So abundance to me can mean something very different than abundance to you.
Yeah.
So most people are probably going to have some idea that it means cash or something,
Right.
but abundance could mean abundance of freedom. Freedom with your time, or freedom to spend with your family, or something to that effect.
Yeah.
So the mission is your vision. The values are how you're going to achieve that vision.
So Rob, on you obviously we've talked about logos a little bit, and we'll probably talk more about them. And so it'd be almost like so your main value, could it tie as a slogan, basically somehow the explanation of your value?
Well, I use that in the next one to go to a con level. So
Okay,
maybe
cool.
that's a good
Okay,
segue. But once you have, so we talked about strategy.
right.
Once you have your strategy, your mission, and your values down, then you can start implementing your strategy. And the two have to align. So if your strategy is to undercut everybody and be nefarious in the market, you can't have values of integrity and honesty and cooperation, right? So
Right.
everything has to be in line with your brand. So once you have your brand story, your mission statement, and your values, only then can you start developing a logo. And I get so irritated when people say, hey, is this a good logo? I don't know. What does your brand stand for? Because it looks pretty, but that's it. So developing logos, I get so irritated at this. But your logo should represent something to do with your mission and values. And the reason I say that is because it becomes so much easier to explain. I mean, you can have the prettiest logo in the world, but if it doesn't mean anything, then it's not worth shit. Right. So, and it goes back to the storytelling aspect. The visual is great, but if you can back that up with a strong story about who you are, where you're going, and what you stand for, that logo then becomes worth something to somebody else. So the logo development, pet peeve of mine, but it is important to a lot of people because it brands your stuff. I used to do an experiment in my classrooms, and I would put 2 T-shirts up on the board, both plain white T-shirts, both very similar quality, but one of them had a Nike swoosh on it and the other one didn't. I said, okay, what is the price of each one of these shirts? Oh, no. And so the one with no logo was made by Bella Canva, right? Bella Canva?
Yeah.
And their entire brand is about supporting crafts and stuff like that. So they intentionally don't put logos on it. So people can buy the shirts and create something. But because that's their brand, they have to have a lower price point so their end user can have a margin, right? Where Nike is selling their brand to you saying, okay, we put our swoosh on it, so that means this is a high quality product. So that's the promise. Then you choose your visuals. So your visuals would include, the things on your webpage, stuff like that. The branding expert that I used to work with said you have imprint, online, and in person. Or no, imprint, online, and in store. So that includes all your marketing material, all of your online, whether that's social media or your web page or things like that. And then the stuff that you have, like your building, just like we talked about in strategy, that your place can be a differentiating factor. Your building also has to represent your brand. McDonald's, for example, their brand is cheap hamburgers, right? So their buildings are not comfortable. They do that intentionally. They have plastic seats because they don't want you to sit in there all day. Versus if you're a high-end, Bob's Steakhouse is a Dallas thing. There is one here, but it's not as great.
Yeah.
So what is the Red Prime is the one here, right?
Yeah.
They have big, nice, cushy seats because those people are going to spend a lot of money, and there's a lot of high margins on it. So the longer people stay, the more money they make. So your building also has to represent your strategy and your brand.
Yeah, Rob,
and then last is implementing.
Just quickly back to the logo. I think a lot of people go into business. I've got a couple of friends of startups right now. You guys actually know a couple of them as well. And they want it to be recognizable, so they want to provide X service to X number of clients or customers. So they got to get something out there. So by creating a name of the company and creating a logo just as hastily, what happens is they feel like they've arrived. They feel like they're now in business, but they don't take the detail to what you're teaching us right now to develop that logo based on your values and your mission. And I can think of, a dozen people right now I've worked with who are just so happy to have a name of a company and logo, and they've arrived. You know what I'm saying? So it's a big fallacy, I think, in many regards.
Yeah.
But I mean, there's that other fallacy too of like you create it and you have your name and then you can't actually register it because it's
right. Somebody else has got that name. Yeah.
Time and money, and you can't use it.
Yeah, and don't Google the name because then it starts creating flow or traffic to a web page, and then you can't afford it. So there's a lot of tricky things that I'm not an expert in. So probably need to bring in a branding expert to talk about some of that. But
yeah, and maybe we will for the meeting. We'll see.
Yeah. But once you have all of that, then you can, this is where things really take off, is when you start incorporating the brand language into your scripts, your marketing, and everything else. So When I worked for the Frisco Rough Riders, we absolutely had all of our values in our scripts. So I cannot tell you how many times I said unsurpassed customer service. I said it so many times, I can still rattle that off without, most of everything else I've learned, I've got to think about where I learned that. That one I know forward and backward because we put it into every single thing that we did. And that's the way we'll talk about scripts when we get to sales. I've got a love-hate relationship with sales scripts, but the good thing is when you do develop scripts or you do develop things like that, you can not necessarily enforce, but you can guide your employees, your sales employees, things like that, to use that language so you're continuing to make that imprint or that impression on the client that they're talking to.
Yeah. But I mean, so I guess on the flip side, I've worked a lot with brand integrity in helping large companies maintain that or rebuild it. Because if you lose control of your brand identity, then you really don't have something to stand on when it comes to warranty, when it comes to customer service, because you're like, I don't know where you bought that, so I can't warranty it, right? It could be counterfeit, it could be X, Y, or Z, right? And so when you start to lose that, you got to rebuild, and it takes a lot longer to rebuild your brand integrity than to have it, own it, and control what it is, and know what it is, and communicate what it is. I mean, I doubt anybody could say that the Frisco Rough Riders didn't have great customer service. Like, if it was so ingrained in every script that you had, then people knew I can go call them and they're going to take care of me.
Right.
It's
What?
just that, like, the consumer, the end user knows they're going to be taken care of.
Yeah, and I think in today's world where we are right now, we're so vulnerable right now because brand integrity can snap overnight. It can break overnight with a bad review, a bad comment. You personally take a stance. I don't want to get political, but you can take a stance today and literally have your whole TV show go down in flames. So we're so vulnerable on brand integrity, and we're really at the whims of the people we serve. I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's just so, because everybody today does good reviews or bad reviews, and it's just the nature of so
Yeah.
every one of us are vulnerable to.
Yeah.
Well, that's a
And I
good
think
point
you gotta
because
remember your brand's not for everyone. Like
right,
the product or service that you provide, it's not for everyone. And that's okay. Like,
that is
you
okay.
didn't go into business to serve the masses. You went into business to serve this one particular group or, your target audience. You went into business to serve them, not everyone. So I
Yep.
think you've got
And
to
we'll talk
remember.
about target audiences next week in the marketing section. But
Yeah.
you're absolutely right. Is you can't please everybody. It's impossible. So why try? Why not build a brand that focuses on your target audience? Also, going back to the analytical side, and Clayton and I have had this conversation several times here recently about people who want to sell their business. And I cannot tell you how many conversations I have about this subject on a regular basis. And if you don't have a strong brand, what are you selling? You don't have assets, you don't have a strong brand. What do you actually have to sell? So if you're, I'm thinking of one, so I don't want to say anything that'll give it away, but if you're, especially services,
Yeah, if you're a
if
service
you're,
business and you show your portfolio and what you're doing to a potential buyer, and I don't care who it is, and they see they can duplicate that without having to spend a nickel, guess what they're going to do? They're going to duplicate that.
or if you're trying to sell it and you don't have a strong brand, you have nothing to sell.
Right.
So, what people are buying when they buy a business is a customer portfolio and brand recognition. So,
100%.
well, that kind of. So, I guess I'd like to end it on just to kind of sum everything up, the story is so important because stories sell, but facts only tell. And building the story helps with communicating that to other people. You were just talking about Google reviews. If you want your customers to walk away saying specific things about you, you almost have to lead them into doing it. You know those magicians that like, I can get you to say this word after I ask you certain questions. It's because they're leading you into saying that. And so by doing these things, your customers can leave saying the things that you need them to say. So I think that's probably where I'd wrap it up. You guys have anything else to add?
No, I think it is extremely important information for everybody, Rob. I think, and Mindy, and I think this is just where I want to see our brand go with Network in Action. I appreciate you guys being a big part of that because it is our groups. And I think when we meet with everybody that views us before the meeting, that bring your questions. We'll be sending along with us a worksheet so you can work with, so we can dive into deeper to a lot of the things that Rob is teaching us and presenting today. And Mindy and Rob and myself will be facilitating some good conversation about this topic.
Yeah. I think too, like if you're struggling with what maybe, and you've been in business for a while, if you're struggling with what your brand and what your brand is, then, I think maybe you can ask some of the people that you serve, ask your clients, ask your former clients, why did you sign up with me? What made you say yes? Or what do you see as my values? What are my strengths? What are my weaknesses? And if they respect you and honor the work that you do for them, they're going to tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm.
And yep. You can't, the goal and the key is to not be offended because it's feedback. You can do something with that.
Mm-hmm.
I talk a lot about surveying in the marketing piece, but you're absolutely right. It could benefit somebody on the branding side as well. Marketing and branding go hand in hand, and I break them up because I wanted easier steps for people to follow. Mm-hmm. But you can't do one without, I guess you don't have to do marketing, but you can't build marketing without a strong brand. Correct. Or at least effective marketing. Mm-hmm. But surveying is so important. And I would also encourage people to give constructive criticism to their friends who own businesses, because it's so hard to see the forest through the trees sometimes. And just like this book, I had so many people tell me, "Oh, this is fantastic. This is great," because they wanted to fluff my pillow. But when it came down to it, even when we did the first podcast of this, you guys were like, "Oh, this is way too complicated." I was like, I could have skipped an entire year of writing if somebody just would have broken that down earlier. So, yeah. But we all have blind spots, and so
absolutely,
that is very important.
All right, until next time, guys.
All right, sounds good. Thank you.
Appreciate it, guys. Bye now.
Bye.